On January 1st, 1995, at precisely 3 p.m., instruments aboard the Draupner natural gas platform, situated in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, captured data confirming what stands as the inaugural documented instance of a rogue wave. Known alternatively as the New Year's wave, this Draupner wave reached a peak elevation of 25.6 meters, equivalent to 84 feet, surpassing by more than double the stature of the tallest waves previously measured in that region during the event. Prior to this breakthrough recording, scientists relied on a probabilistic framework known as the Gaussian function to forecast the upper limits of wave heights. According to this approach, surges beyond 15 meters, or 49 feet, were deemed exceedingly improbable, while a colossal 30-meter or 98-foot swell might occur only once in every 10,000 years. For centuries, sailors had shared gripping tales of enormous aberrant waves that loomed menacingly above vessels and engulfed them without warning, yet credible verified testimonies remained scarce. In the pages of oceanographic literature, references to such anomalous or rogue waves were scant, and those that appeared were typically dismissed as practically unattainable phenomena. You may recognize this familiar illustration. It depicts the groundbreaking study undertaken by statistician Abraham Wald, analyzing planes that made it back safely from World War II bombing runs, a classic case study in survivorship bias, arguably the most famous of its kind. The regions of the aircraft exhibiting the greatest number of impacts indicate zones capable of withstanding harm without catastrophe. Conversely, the sections displaying zero signs of injury highlight critical vulnerabilities where any strike would lead to destruction. In her 2010 publication titled The Wave, Susan Casey observed that reports from survivors describing rogue waves emerged primarily following the introduction of robust, steel-constructed, double-hulled vessels in the 20th century, as prior victims of such incidents rarely lived to recount their experiences. After the notable Draupner wave event of 1995, investigations gained momentum to validate the reality of these occurrences, culminating in the release of the inaugural thorough scientific analysis in 1997. From that point onward, although rogue waves continue to defy prediction and their precise origins spark intense scholarly contention, they have become an established and verified aspect of maritime life, infrequent yet happening with greater regularity than once presumed, characterized as swells exceeding twice the elevation of the surrounding tallest waves at the moment. These towering surges of seawater arise abruptly and pose severe threats, capable of overwhelming even the most advanced and fortified contemporary ships. Although scientific comprehension of rogue waves solidified only toward the close of the 1990s, historical records include several verified instances of passenger liners clashing with these colossal forces, yielding catastrophic consequences. In the annals of maritime history, a massive rogue wave measuring 23 meters, or 75 feet, slammed into the RMS Lusitania on January 10, 1910, inflicting severe harm to its bridge structure. Decades later, during December 1942, the Queen Mary, then serving in her role as a troop transport, faced a colossal 28-meter, or 92-foot swell located approximately 608 nautical miles from Scotland's shoreline. This behemoth of an 80,000-ton vessel was transporting 11,339 American troops along with its personnel when the wave struck, causing it to teeter perilously close to overturning. It heeled over at a staggering 52-degree angle before gradually steadying itself. Such a harrowing incident later fueled the imagination behind the 1969 book The Poseidon Adventure, as well as the 1972 motion picture sharing its title. Then, in 1966, another of these unpredictable monster waves turned fatal for the Italian ocean liner SS Michelangelo. Constructed by the Ansaldo shipyard in Genoa for the Italian line, the vessel bore the designation of Yard Number 1577. The preliminary designs for the Michelangelo and her sibling ship, the Raffaello, started to emerge in 1958. Even as air travel by jet was beginning to establish itself, these grand superliners appeared well suited to the demands of Mediterranean crossings. They stood as the biggest passenger ships crafted in Italy following the debut of the SS Rex back in 1931. The Michelangelo registered at 45,911 tons in displacement. Her length stretched to 276.2 meters, equivalent to 609 feet and 2 inches, while her width spanned 30.1 meters, or 98 feet and 9 inches. Powered by geared turbines that generated 87,000 shaft horsepower, she propelled her twin screws to reach a solid operational speed of 26.5 knots. This grand vessel had space for 1,475 travelers, divided among 3 classes, supported by a staff of 720. The Michelangelo took to the water for the first time on September 16, 1962. Together with her identical sibling, these two stood as among the final ocean liners constructed specifically for that role to begin operations. Her form boasted an elegant white exterior, crowned by a pair of funnels that, if you'll pardon the expression, looked downright peculiar. These stacks incorporated an open lattice of piping to let breezes flow freely through, topped off by a substantial fin to redirect exhaust upward. While the style divided opinions, despite its merits, it excelled at keeping soot away from the rear promenades. At last, she embarked on her inaugural crossing of the Atlantic on May 12, 1965. Yet when she began her runs, the rise of jet aircraft was already eroding ridership on those vital sea lanes, leaving the Michelangelo and her counterpart hard-pressed to draw crowds. Still, during her initial seasons, she offered an alluring choice for ocean-goers, enjoying a short-lived burst of fame. On April 6, 1966, the grand liner Michelangelo set sail from Genoa on her customary transatlantic journey toward New York City. At the helm stood the seasoned Captain Giuseppe Stiletti, whose seafaring expertise spanned more than 4 decades. Approaching retirement, he viewed this trip as among his last major undertakings at sea. Aboard were 1,495 travelers in total, among them the acclaimed German author Günter Grass, accompanied by his spouse Anna, the head of the Italian shipping company, and Bob Montana, the illustrator renowned for originating the Archie comic series. Voyages commencing so soon after winter typically encountered harsh atmospheric disturbances. That particular year, the 1966 cold season had been unusually severe. The vessel's preferred southern path generally spared her the most turbulent stretches of the North Atlantic. Yet, by the 6th day at sea, April 12th, as she pressed onward westward, a northward adjustment in direction became necessary to approach her destination, drawing her into the perilous conditions. The weather swiftly intensified. Before long, ferocious waves and gales, akin to those of a hurricane, battered the majestic ship. Tossed with such ferocity, the liner prompted Captain Stiletti to instruct every passenger to stay confined to their staterooms, while he maneuvered a new bearing to position the onslaught from the starboard side, rather than head-on from the fore. The forward superstructure of the Michelangelo housed luxurious first-class quarters, complete with windows providing stunning vistas of the vessel's bow. To guard against the fierce swells crashing against her prow and forward areas, Captain Stiletti directed those staying in such rooms to relocate to more secure inner cabins. Additional measures were implemented to shield the ship from the tempest's fury. Windows and portholes at the front and sides received protective armor. Watertight hatches were sealed shut, and sturdy ropes were strung across the expansive public areas to steady passengers as they navigated the wide interiors. Announcements blared through the onboard intercom, urging everyone to remain in their staterooms and refrain from venturing out unless essential. While battling her way through the gale, the liner intercepted a distress signal from the nearby tanker Rocco's, which had suffered structural harm and was flooding. In swift response, Captain Stiletti commanded the Michelangelo to veer toward the endangered ship for rescue support. However, moments after altering course, the Rocco's transmitted an update, stating that the crisis had stabilized, and outside help was no longer required. Thus, the Michelangelo could pivot back toward her New York destination. Yet, shortly after regaining their original path, a vent on the foredeck shattered, unleashing a torrent of seawater into the hull. Captain Stiletti promptly reversed the ship's direction, angling her bow away from the onslaught of waves to offer some shelter from the raging ocean for Vice Captain Claudio Kuklich, along with 4 fellow crew volunteers, as they advanced to address the breach. Amid the crew's arduous efforts to fix the issue, the surrounding storm started to subside. Even as the turbulent waters eased, the heavens overhead churned with foreboding shades of deep, shadowy gloom. Sensing the worsening had passed sufficiently, Captain Stiletti deemed it prudent to permit passengers and staff to re-enter the ship's anterior zones. Werner Berndt, a Hamburg-based entrepreneur, and his spouse made their way back to their front stateroom to freshen up their attire. John Steinbach, the 58-year-old insurance executive from Chicago, along with his assistant, made their way back to the adjacent cabin. Meanwhile, a handful of off-duty crew members hurried toward the forward sections of the ship, eager to observe and capture images of the storm's lingering effects. By approximately 10 a.m., the team under Vice Captain Kuklich had completed the necessary fixes for the earlier storm damage and contacted the bridge to inform Captain Stiletti that conditions allowed them to return to the planned route. In the midst of executing this adjustment, the Michelangelo suddenly plunged into an exceptionally profound trough, right on the heels of which a towering surge of water crashed against the vessel's bow and upper forward areas, throwing the entire ship into brief pandemonium. At that instant, First Officer Claudio Sitoro found himself in the chart room, having stepped away from the bridge's main viewing windows just moments earlier, a position that would almost surely have proven fatal. Sitoro had no recollection of the wave's initial strike, only the events that unfolded right afterward. Darkness enveloped him for a split second, then a torrent of seawater flooded the bridge and knocked him down. Once he steadied himself, he traced the piercing clamor of bells and alarms coming from the wheelhouse. Inside, the space was awash, with water streaming back out to sea. Virtually all the windows lay shattered. Over on the starboard side, he discovered Captain Stiletti in a daze, steadying himself against the possibility of another blow. The rest of the bridge personnel, who had all escaped the watery onslaught unharmed in a stroke of sheer luck, adopted comparable defensive postures, while the helmsman remained upright, gripping the wheel tightly. Thankfully, the steering mechanism continued to function, enabling the crew to retain command of the liner. Had that vital gear been impaired, the whole vessel might have been doomed. The captain soon collected his thoughts and started directing efforts to manage the crisis. Experts calculate that the wave which battered the Michelangelo measured about 21.4 meters, equivalent to 70 feet, in height. The force of the blast buckled a section of the forward aluminum bulkhead, instantly ripping open a substantial part of the area housing her front passenger compartments. On the spot, 2 travelers, John Steinbach and Werner Berndt, lost their lives, while a youthful staffer named Desidero Ferrari succumbed to his wounds shortly afterward. Roughly 50 other passengers suffered injuries, with several facing grave conditions. Remarkably, however, the vessel's essential systems remained intact, sparing her engines, propellers, and steering gear from any harm. With the fiercest part of the tempest behind them, the rattled team aboard managed to seal up the breaches to the extent possible. Come April 15th, she linked up with a United States Coast Guard chopper, which evacuated a team member nursing a broken skull. The ship's infirmaries brimmed with the remaining hurt passengers and personnel, all receiving care from the onboard medical staff. Battered and weary, the Michelangelo made her way into New York Harbor on April 16th, her ensign lowered in mourning. Docking at Pier 90, she faced a swarm of journalists and anxious relatives. Provisional fixes took place at the Bethlehem shipyard in Hoboken, after which, on April 20th, she set off for Genoa to undergo lasting restorations. In the process, the aluminum sections of her upper framework were swapped out for more robust steel plating. At that era, aluminum had been a standard choice for such constructions on liners, prompting identical upgrades on her sibling vessel, along with the SS United States and the SS France. The structural enhancements proved resilient during yet another gale of hurricane intensity that struck the Michelangelo in December 1967. From the very outset of her operations, the vessel's occupancy rates proved lackluster, and as the decade of the 1960s progressed, those figures deteriorated further. Numerous prominent transatlantic vessels of that era were either being decommissioned or spending portions of the year on cruise itineraries in a frantic bid to hold on to their clientele. Although the Michelangelo's outward design hinted at strong potential for cruise duties, her interior layout segregated passengers into 3 distinct classes, complicating any shift to a unified, all-inclusive cruising setup. Moreover, the 3 decks positioned lowest on the ship had been built entirely without portholes, leaving a substantial portion of her staterooms devoid of natural light or views, which made them particularly unappealing to leisure-seeking travelers on vacation voyages. These inherent limitations, combined with her ill-timed debut, led to a brief operational lifespan for the Michelangelo, culminating in her removal from active duty in July 1975. Her last crossing was overseen by the then-experienced Captain Claudio Kucilic. For a short time, Norwegian Cruise Line mulled over acquiring the idle ship, though they opted instead for the SS France. By 1976, ownership transferred to the Shah of Iran, where she served as a stationary accommodation for troops. Her end came with scrapping in 1991. In essence, the Michelangelo and her sibling vessel symbolized the decline of the classic ocean liner era. They represented major economic setbacks for their Italian operators and struggled to adapt as the sector pivoted toward cruise operations. Today, perhaps her most notable legacy stems from a confrontation with a rogue wave, an alarming episode that underscored the perilous challenges these majestic ships endured right up to their final years. Just after midnight on February 8, 2000, Captain Keith Avery of the research vessel RMS Discovery found himself battling the most ferocious ocean conditions of his career. Aboard the vessel, 47 scientists and crew members had set out on what was meant to be an ordinary scientific expedition. At that moment, across the 3,000-ton craft, they clung desperately to any stable surface to avoid tumbling about uncontrollably. Positioned 175 miles from Scotland's shoreline, they found themselves ensnared by relentless storms in a treacherous zone lying east of Rockall, a volcanic outcrop known as Waveland due to its savage waters, which have doomed over 1,000 vessels throughout history. As if the ordeal weren't dire enough already, the RMS Discovery suddenly dropped into a profound valley between waves. She tilted sharply 28 degrees toward the port side, then surged 30 degrees in the opposite direction to starboard, only for an enormous surge of water to materialize abruptly, looming high above the deck. With no way to evade it, Captain Avery drove the ship straight ahead, colliding forcefully with the thundering expanse of ocean. The overwhelming noise of the hull battering against the deluge appeared to freeze the moment in place, yet miraculously they broke through to calmer waters beyond. The RMS Discovery emerged damaged and worn, with a lifeboat on the forward deck completely wrecked, alongside shattered computers and broken interior fittings, though the hull itself held firm. For hundreds of years, seafarers have shared tales of colossal waves that appear without warning and engulf entire ships in seconds. Such accounts were long dismissed as mere myths and exaggerations. Yet the experience of the RMS Discovery proved otherwise. As a dedicated research ship, it carried instruments designed to measure and log every swell it faced. Once the perilous journey concluded, Dr. Penny Holliday, serving as one of the vessel's 2 lead scientists, examined the collected readings in detail. Researchers discovered that the significant wave height, calculated as the average of the top 1/3 of waves, reached an incredible 61 feet, equivalent to 18.6 meters. Moreover, the most enormous wave they faced soared to 95.5 feet, or 29.1 meters in metric terms. These stood among the most colossal waves ever captured through scientific measurement. Experts classify a rogue wave as one that exceeds twice the prevailing significant wave height. Prior to its inaugural documented occurrence at the Draupner oil platform in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea back in 1995, such enormous swells were dismissed as mere legends. Stories spun by sailors disoriented by fierce storms. Yet, several prominent passenger vessels had clashed with these perilous ocean phenomena. In 1910, the RMS Lusitania, one of the era's grandest and swiftest vessels, barely escaped disaster after colliding with a wave that threatened to sink the enormous ship. The RMS Lusitania emerged as a trailblazing liner, constructed amid growing worries that Britain's commercial fleet was losing ground. The year 1897 saw the German vessel Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse seize the Blue Riband, the coveted title for the quickest transatlantic voyage, from Cunard's Campania, and Germany held on to that honor when the Deutschland took it over in 1900. Meanwhile, the influential U.S. financier J.P. Morgan perhaps familiar from those steep $100 charges on minor $2 overdrafts, was acquiring British maritime firms to dominate the Atlantic shipping market. By 1902, Morgan's International Mercantile Marine Company had snapped up Cunard's chief competitor, the White Star Line, thereby transferring its extensive armada to American control. This development alarmed the British Admiralty, which feared that in the event of conflict, their merchant navy might find itself restricted and inferior. Against this backdrop, Cunard Line proposed to the British authorities a bold initiative for constructing two groundbreaking ships, aimed at reclaiming national prestige while offering potential military resources should hostilities arise. The government endorsed the endeavor, providing a $2.6 million loan alongside an annual operating subsidy of $75,000, supplemented by a mail-carrying agreement that brought in an extra $68,000 each year. Named for ancient Roman territories, the Lusitania and Mauretania adhered to rigorous specifications from the Admiralty, facilitating their potential transformation into armed merchant vessels. As World War I unfolded, it became evident that such grand passenger ships proved woefully inadequate as combat vessels, though this truth escaped notice during their creation. The Lusitania's blueprint came from the renowned naval designer Leonard Pescott, with construction taking place at the John Brown and Cumber facilities in Clydebank, Scotland. Work began on her keel on August 17, 1904, culminating in her launch on June 7, 1906. Although Princess Louise had been scheduled to perform the christening ceremony, her absence led to Lady Mary Inverclyde, widow of Cunard's previous leader, stepping in to name the vessel. At the moment of her debut, she held the title of the world's biggest ocean liner, though the Mauretania edged her out just a short time afterward. Above all else, her engineering emphasized velocity. Engineers opted for Parsons steam turbines, a cutting-edge and largely experimental innovation, after experiments aboard modest prototypes demonstrated their promise. The immense force generated by these innovative engines generated 76,000 horsepower, propelling 4 screws to reach a remarkable operational velocity of 24 knots. The vessel embarked on its inaugural trip on September 7, 1907, securing the prestigious Blue Ribbon just 1 month afterward, in October of the same year. To attain the utmost velocity, the Lusitania featured a sharply tapered prow on its hull, crafted to slice through the water's surface instead of climbing atop the swells. Although this innovation boosted her pace considerably, it introduced erratic problems with balance. The Lusitania and the Mauretania often plunged forward at the front without warning, at times with sudden force, startling the staff and travelers alike, including during milder ocean conditions. These vessels excelled in performance overall, yet amid turbulent waters, the forward configuration led to intensely frightening episodes. With sloping mass and dipping power, the ship row fast, laud Lord the blessed, and southward aye we fled. Transatlantic journeys in January are infamous for their turbulence, and the 1910 season was turning out to be particularly grueling, with successive tempests sweeping across the North Atlantic. On the morning of Sunday, January 9th, the RMS Lusitania departed from Queensland, Ireland, for her standard crossing to New York. No sooner had she passed into the Irish Channel than powerful waves battered her, and upon leaving the Irish shoreline behind, she met a brutal gale blowing from the west by southwest, which tormented her for the duration of the journey. William Thomas Turner began his career with the Cunard Line in 1878, starting out as a fourth officer. Captain Turner took the helm of his initial vessel, the Aleppo, back in 1903. Then, come November 1908, he received orders to lead the Lusitania. As Monday, January 10th, drew toward evening, the Lusitania contended with fierce gales blowing from the west, alongside towering waves. Yet she pressed on reliably, albeit at a moderated pace of 14 knots. Around 6 p.m., the captain stepped away from the bridge to join a handful of passengers spared from mal de mer for an evening meal. In his absence, Chief Officer Sandy G.S. McNeill assumed responsibility for the deck. McNeill had joined the Cunard Line's officer cadre at the age of 26. His career kicked off aboard the Pavonia, where he steadily advanced until earning promotion to chief officer on the Umbria in 1905. By 1907, he had shifted over to the Lusitania. The conditions that day proved turbulent, though hardly a match for the mighty ocean liner's capabilities. Positioned along the bridge's rail, McNeill observed the tempest as the vessel forged ahead through the swells. In an instant, without any prior indication, the deck fell away under his feet, plunging sharply into an exceptionally profound valley between waves. Momentarily dazed, he scanned for the distant line where sea met sky, only to be met with dread at the sight of an enormous surge of emerald seawater bearing down on them. He dashed toward the wheelhouse, but even as he tried to secure the entrance, the colossal breakers crashed against the hull. This furious assault threw the bridge into utter disarray, with flood waters surging to engulf McNeill up to his torso. The helm, which Quartermaster Ripley clutched tightly, was wrenched free as the sailor was hurled backward into the partition dividing the wheelhouse from the chart room. Standing close by, Quartermaster Harding found himself hurled across the space and ended up with a slight wound to his leg. The surging water caused a short circuit in the sidelights, along with those in the foremast, chart room, and wheelhouse, leaving the entire area shrouded in blackness. Amid the disarray, McNeill managed to rise while debris-filled water, now reaching his waist, churned violently around him. The only thing he recalled noticing was a hand clad in a white glove flashing by in the turmoil. It was the hand of deckhand Tommy Hughes, who had dropped to the deck just as the torrent crashed against the bridge. He got lifted and carried across the area, but at the last moment he seized an iron stanchion, preventing him from being swept over the side. Up on the compass platform above the bridge, Third Officer Story spotted the oncoming wave and gripped the compass stand desperately as the deluge battered him. Once the salt water had receded, McNeill regained his composure, and after about 15 minutes, the crew restored power to the lights. It was then that the true scale of the destruction became apparent. The wave's immense power had shattered nearly all the wheelhouse windows, buckled the metal bulkhead, and fractured extensive sections of the wooden fittings. Seawater poured into the officers' wardroom, inundating a large portion of their living spaces. The two forward lifeboats on the starboard side were wrenched from their davits and hurled onto the deck below. Even their sturdy 10-inch iron davits had been bent out of shape by the overwhelming rush of the water. At that point, McNeill discovered that his coat and shirt were soaked in blood. During the mayhem, he had somehow received a gash on his forehead and another on his chin. Astonishingly, the sole injuries sustained were McNeill's gashes and the mild leg bruise to Quartermaster Harding. A number of travelers aboard were jolted by the collision, yet, with the majority confined to their cabins while grappling with mal de mer, the event resulted in no further significant harm. The forward section of the Lusitania sustained no major harm, save for certain impairments to the planking on her forecastle. In the crew's forward accommodations, the dividing walls showed minor distortions, while the bronze tubing linking the rear lifting apparatus to the front had become twisted. The vessel came to a halt as inspectors evaluated the harm, and swiftly made temporary fixes. Tarpaulins were fastened across the panes of the command deck. Temporary control from the rear helm was employed until the primary rudder mechanism could be restored, and just 40 minutes following the rogue wave's assault, the liner resumed its course. This mishap etched lasting indentations into her upper surfaces and navigation area, scars that accompanied the ship throughout its remaining voyages. The Lusitania pulled into New York Harbor a few hours past her expected time. Prompt restorations followed, allowing her to swiftly resume routine operations. The precise dimensions of the rogue wave that struck the ocean liner that day remain a mystery, though Captain Turner observed that the roof of her pilot house sat 80 feet, or 24.4 meters, above the sea level, and the surge effortlessly crested far beyond it. In conversations with reporters, he described it as the standout episode in his professional life, though subsequent occurrences would soon eclipse that claim in the years ahead. In the ensuing period, Charles B. McNeil advanced to the rank of staff captain and was reassigned to the RMS Mauretania during the subsequent year. He marked a milestone as the inaugural officer from the Gunther Line to attain such a position. Eventually, he ascended to the command of the Mauretania itself. Meanwhile, Captain William T. Turner stayed at the helm of the Lusitania until he shifted to a different ocean liner in 1912. By 1915, he rejoined his vessel, affectionately known as Lucy, assuming leadership as it persisted in ferrying passengers across the Atlantic, even amid the escalating tensions of World War I. It was on May 7, 1915, that he endured the ship's fateful demise, a catastrophe whose ripples would reshape the course of global events. Yet that tale belongs to a separate chapter. Among the iconic vessels of its era, the Lusitania stood out as one of the rare legends to confront the fury of a monstrous rogue wave. Thanks to her immense scale and robust construction, she weathered the assault with mere surface scratches, though the incident serves as a stark lesson. For all the grandeur and might we infuse into our maritime creations, the ocean's vast dominion remains unmatched. Barely past the stroke of midnight on December 12, 1978, Heinz Lohmann, serving as the wireless operator aboard the German passenger liner MS Carib, was engaged in a casual conversation with his colleague Jörg Ernst, who manned the radio on the freighter MS München, positioned some 2,400 nautical miles distant at sea. The exchange between them remained light-hearted, conducted over a channel reserved for non-official exchanges. Static from weather conditions disrupted the link, making it difficult for Lohmann to catch Ernst's words as he described how the München battled fierce gales across the North Atlantic. Swells had already shattered several portholes and caused slight harm to the bridge structure, yet Ernst showed no worry. Built as a cutting-edge ship, the München was engineered to withstand the harshest conditions the North Atlantic might unleash. Experts regarded her as virtually impervious to sinking. Within moments, Ernst's voice grew faint to the point of vanishing. Lohmann suggested switching to a different channel, but Ernst turned it down, prompting them to wrap up the call. He closed with a farewell to his companion. "Enjoy your voyage, and we'll meet again shortly." Just 3 hours afterward, at 3:10 a.m., the Greek cargo ship Marion intercepted a weak distress call transmitted in Morse code. Though the signal proved largely garbled, the crew discerned the München's identifier, along with a location detail that would turn out to be wrong, phrased as 50° starboard. Shortly thereafter, alerts from the München's onboard automatic distress devices began arriving, triggering a vast multinational effort to locate and aid those in peril. The fate of the München and its entire crew remains a complete mystery, with the vessel vanishing without a trace. Scant remnants of this enormous freighter surfaced in time, offering just sparse indications of a terrifying demise. In the merger of September 1, 1970, the storied German maritime firms Hamburg American Line, or Haupt-Hog, and Norddeutscher Lloyd united forces to form Haupt-Hog Lloyd, which now ranks as the world's 5th biggest operator of container vessels. As part of their growth and fleet upgrades, on May 12, 1972, they introduced a fresh addition to their lineup, designated Hull number 860, from the Cockerell shipyards in Belgium. Named the MS München, drawing from the German term for the city of Munich, this innovative ship stood out as the sole German-registered lash transporter. The lash concept, known as leader aboard ship, emerged in the 1960s from the ingenuity of American designer Jerome Goldman. Resembling traditional container carriers, these ships accommodated multiple compact barges termed lighters. They featured a robust crane system capable of deploying each lighter separately into the sea, allowing tugs to pull them along narrower channels. Such an approach streamlined the process of offloading and dispersing goods with greater efficiency. Measuring 857.5 feet, or 261.4 meters long, with a width of 105.5 feet, or 32.2 meters, the München displaced 37,134 gross registered tons. Propulsion came from a 9-cylinder Solchen 9 R&D 90 diesel unit, producing 26,100 horsepower to turn a single 5-bladed screw and reach a working speed of 18 knots. Built with advanced fittings, she proved capable of confronting severe gales akin to hurricane intensities. The MS München joined the fleet of Hapag-Lloyd on December 22, 1972, embarking on her inaugural journey just over a month afterward, on October 19th. Her twin vessel, the MS Bilderdijk, had been constructed specifically for the Holland-America line and continued in service right up to her decommissioning at the close of 2007, after which she was dismantled. During their initial phase of operations, these two ships demonstrated impressive reliability, allowing their personnel to face perilous weather with relative confidence as they routinely transported goods across seasons in challenging environments. On December 7, 1978, the München set out from Bremerhaven on what would become her 62nd crossing. Her intended port was the familiar one in Savannah, Georgia, though the path ahead lay directly in the path of a fierce tempest that had been battering the North Atlantic since the previous month. Yet, such tempests fell squarely within the vessel's engineering specifications, having been successfully endured on prior outings throughout her working life. Nothing suggested this trip would deviate from the standard pattern of a demanding but unremarkable passage. Under the command of Captain Johann Danekamp, the vessel carried a crew and passengers totaling 28 individuals, 25 men and 3 women. Its hold was loaded with 83 lighters, filled primarily with steel goods, along with a spare nuclear reactor vessel head destined for combustion engineering, Inc. The journey commenced in routine fashion. Yet as the München pressed onward into the North Atlantic, the weather swiftly turned hostile near the storm's periphery. Come the nightfall of December 11th, positioned just north of the Azores, the ship plunged into the gale's core, which a proximate British meteorological outpost dubbed the Monster of the Monk. Gusts whipped up to 93 miles per hour, equivalent to 150 kilometers per hour, while swells surged to almost 50 feet, or 15 meters, in height. Despite this fury, those aboard the München betrayed no alarm. In the exchange with his acquaintance Heinz Lohmann aboard the German liner Caribe, some 2,400 nautical miles distant, radio specialist Jörg Ernst, shortly past midnight on December 12th, remarked offhandedly that their craft was battling a fierce tempest and had sustained harm to the bridge and several portholes, though his tone conveyed little distress. Such winter gales in the North Atlantic were familiar territory to these veteran communicators. Ernst went on to detail their circumstances further, yet Lohmann struggled to decipher the latter portion of the transmission. When Lohmann proposed switching to a more robust signal band, Ernst turned it down. He wrapped up the conversation with a simple farewell to his companion. "Enjoy your voyage, and we'll meet again shortly." As the darkness persisted and the tempest intensified, the ordeal unfolded further. Roughly at 3:10 a.m., the wireless officer aboard the Greek cargo ship Marion intercepted a haunting transmission. Heavily garbled due to static from the weather, the faint Morse code distress alert, an SOS, was only partially legible to him. Before long, the Soviet ship Maria Yermolova started capturing similar pleas for aid. Through successive bursts of communication, the Marion's crew managed to discern the term forward, along with the vessel's identity and its coordinates. A different freighter caught snippets reading 50° starboard and the term Arcticus. Such disjointed transmissions formed an enigma that still perplexes experts today, with potential interpretations to be examined further in this presentation. Across the North Atlantic, wireless personnel kept intercepting scattered signals from the München, relayed via backup apparatus, which implied the München was without main electricity. By 4:43 a.m., various listening posts started logging the ship's automated alarm beacons. These persisted up to 7:34, at which point American receivers shifted bands, though evidence suggests the emissions likely endured well beyond that point. At first, even with these ominous appeals echoing through the airwaves, the response remained remarkably subdued. The SS München stood out as a sturdy and reliable ship, yet even as signs emerged that she was struggling amid the fierce gale, hardly anyone anticipated the true severity of the peril awaiting her. However, come midday, with faint distress signals persisting and the tempest showing no mercy, authorities swiftly coordinated a multinational operation to locate and aid the vessel. In a matter of hours, this initiative expanded dramatically into an extensive hunt that revealed a trail of evidence pointing toward a tragic fate for the München and everyone aboard. For generations, seafarers had passed down tales of enormous rogue waves that appeared without warning, engulfing entire vessels in moments. Yet, heading into 1978, experts in marine science still dismissed such events as mere legend. With vessels growing ever bigger and tougher over time, brushes with these monstrous swells turned less deadly. And throughout the 20th century, several prominent ships managed to limp back to safety, bearing chilling accounts of their ordeals. During January 1910, an immense breaker crashed against the RMS Lusitania, inflicting lasting harm to her command deck. Then, in December 1942, as the RMS Queen Mary transported more than 11,000 American soldiers, a colossal 92-foot, or 28-meter, surge struck her directly on the side. Tilting perilously at 52 degrees toward the left, she eventually steadied herself. That close call went on to fuel the 1969 book and the 1972 movie adaptation known as The Poseidon Adventure. Likewise, in 1966, such a towering surge battered the Italian cruise ship Michelangelo, tearing through her upper framework and claiming the lives of 3 crew members. Lacking formal documentation or scientific analysis, though, these episodes remained largely mysterious and unexplained. For many years, scientists relied on a statistical model known as the Gaussian function to forecast the heights of ocean waves. According to this equation, surges exceeding 98 feet, or 30 meters, would occur only once in every 10,000 years. Although experts had long harbored doubts about such rarity, concrete evidence emerged on January 1, 1995, when instruments aboard the Draupner gas platform in the North Sea captured a swell measuring 84 feet, or 25.6 meters. That incident ignited an ongoing scientific investigation into the mysteries of rogue waves, which persists to the present. Such a rogue wave qualifies as any swell surpassing twice the prevailing significant wave height in its vicinity. Though they remain infrequent, marine specialists today recognize that these colossal formations arise multiple times annually across the globe. Our grasp of rogue waves is still in its early stages, yet evidence suggests no solitary trigger lies behind them. Instead, they emerge from a combination of circumstances aligning perfectly under specific conditions. Strong winds paired with powerful currents, for instance, can foster an atypical ocean environment in which an ordinary swell starts absorbing power from neighboring waves, briefly coalescing into a towering behemoth. Regions featuring robust currents flowing against the prevailing wave patterns appear especially susceptible to such developments. Cape Agulhas in South Africa stands out as a notable hotspot for these occurrences. Despite advancing insights into rogue waves, experts remain far from the ability to forecast this perilous event with precision. Though our knowledge has grown immensely since the München encountered that ferocious gale in the North Atlantic back in 1978. Even though signals from the München's emergency broadcasts were detected starting at 3:10 a.m. on December 12th, it wasn't until 6 a.m. that Hapag-Lloyd learned about the escalating emergency. Coordination for a multinational search and rescue mission, led by His Majesty's Coast Guard from their base at Land's End in Cornwall, got underway at 7:30, with the initial Royal Air Force surveillance plane, a Hawker Siddeley Nimrod, lifting off at 9:30 to commence operations. The ferocity of the storm hampered these early attempts, as gale-force winds surpassing those of a hurricane persisted while rescuers reached the vicinity indicated by the München's pleas for help. By 3:30 p.m., the Coast Guard designated the Dutch salvage vessel Smit Rotterdam, under the command of Captain P.F. Denies, to serve as the coordinator on site for the search and rescue. Come December 13th, the effort involved 3 aircraft and 6 vessels scouring the area for signs of the München. That morning at 9:06, Michael F. Sennett, a hobbyist radio operator based in Brussels, intercepted a voice signal on an unusual frequency ordinarily reserved for a German broadcaster. Although the audio came through distinctly, interfering static obscured parts of the content. Yet Sennett discerned the München's name and its call sign. Lacking transmitting equipment for that band, he couldn't respond to the originator, and instead passed along the details to authorities. In subsequent interviews with investigators, he described the speaker's tone as composed, and the English delivery marked by a pronounced German inflection. In the late afternoon of the same day, from 5 p.m. until 7:14 p.m., the U.S. naval station in Rota, Spain, captured 10 faint Mayday signals transmitted via Morse code. These alerts referenced 28 individuals aboard and included the München's call sign, appearing to be pre-recorded transmissions repeating in a cycle. Throughout the day, the search operations pressed forward. Persistent gales kept wind velocities elevated, restricting sight lines to a mere 2 to 4 nautical miles. On December 14th, the German Navy contributed to the hunt by deploying extra aircraft and ships. Although the gusts abated a bit, they continued to hinder operations. At this point, transmissions from the München had ceased entirely. Yet intermittent pings persisted from her distress beacon. At last, around 7 p.m., the British cargo vessel King George encountered the initial remnants of the vanished vessel. One solitary life raft that showed no evidence of deployment. Shortly thereafter, the Hapag-Lloyd freighter Erlangen recovered 3 of the München's gliders. In the days that followed, with winds gradually subsiding, the operation expanded in scope. During December 15th, a British Nimrod plane detected 2 of the ship's distinctive orange markers, while the salvage tug Titan retrieved yet another life raft. This particular one bore a coating of oil and displayed no indications of having been occupied by München personnel. Come December 16th, the MS Badenstein located a 3rd life raft, also untouched. By December 17th, conditions had improved markedly, facilitating smoother reconnaissance. Vessels patrolled the region at intervals of 3 nautical miles, sweeping an enormous swath of ocean. Before long, the Sea-Land consumer uncovered a 4th life raft. Observers also noted 3 life vests adrift. Later that afternoon, the Düsseldorf Express came upon the München's emergency radio buoy, which was stained with oil. In the ensuing days, the hunt for survivors intensified steadily. Yet, optimism for rescuing any souls from the doomed freighter dwindled rapidly. Several days elapsed with no fresh findings, leading authorities to suspend the global rescue operation on December 20th. Nevertheless, the German authorities alongside Hapag-Lloyd opted to spearhead further searches for an additional pair of days, though these endeavors yielded nothing. As dusk fell on December 22nd, the final attempts to locate any remaining members of the München's crew were abandoned. This extensive operation involved more than 80 commercial and military ships from multiple nations, complemented by 13 planes dispatched from the United Kingdom, United States, Portugal, and Germany. The ultimate significant remnant of the München surfaced on February 16, 1979, when the vehicle carrier Don Carlos recovered and retrieved its starboard lifeboat. To this day, no additional evidence of the München has come to light. A formal inquiry into the vessel's disappearance was carried out by the Bremerhaven Maritime Authority, which issued its conclusive document on the event in June 1980. Examiners discovered nothing amiss in the vessel's blueprint, interior setup, onboard gear, overall state, cargo distribution, or crew composition that might explain its demise. Attention turned sharply to the solitary lifeboat, on the starboard flank. There, the substantial upright pins that had secured it were observed to be deformed, curved rearward from their frontward orientation, a sign that an immense impact had hammered the ship's forward right-hand section, shoving the boat backward and wrenching it free from its mounts. Normally, this lifeboat sat perched on the vessel's upper framework at a height of 66 feet, or 20 meters, over the sea surface. The probe determined that the fierce storm battering the München had triggered an extraordinary occurrence responsible for its loss. At that era, the notion of rogue waves was neither recognized nor broadly accepted, leaving the report's terminology imprecise and general. Formally, the precise circumstances surrounding the München's end stay unresolved. Yet, when piecing together the inquiry's outcomes with the barrage of radio signals captured during the ordeal, a persuasive account emerges of the probable sequence that befell the München amid that disastrous evening. Operators on land and aboard multiple ships nearby picked up scores of these transmissions. The bulk proved almost impossible to make out, though a few key terms and snippets emerged clearly. The vessel's identity and coordinates, plus references to forward, 50 degrees starboard, Arcticus, and collision. Likely, forward and collision allude to the incident sparking the ship's crisis. The phrase 50 degrees starboard might denote a tilt to one side, although experts note it could instead describe an approach from behind or a pinpointed spot. Arcticus, in particular, has fueled extensive debate. The official analysis dismissed it as a transcription slip, proposing antennas as the intended term, which would fit a narrative of structural harm. Alternative views, however, posited as a garbled mention of the Artemida, a Russian vessel operating nearby that was presumably the nearest to the München when the call went out. Regrettably, the coordinates relayed in those broadcasts turned out to be wrong by no less than 100 nautical miles compared to the München's true whereabouts then. That vital error hampered rescue operations during those vital initial stages. Among the signals intercepted, the one captured by Michael F. Sennett on December 13th stands out as the most peculiar. This broadcast occurred on a wavelength ordinarily reserved for a German radio outlet, far beyond the capabilities of the München's backup generators to reach effectively. Should the transmission prove genuine, it implies that the München's crew managed a temporary revival of their systems, sufficient for just a short burst of communication. Yet the decision to utilize that particular band remains an enigma. Representatives from Apogloid regarded such intercepts as legitimate. Though unusual, these accounts align with the prevailing explanation for the München's fate. When viewed alongside contemporary insights into rogue waves, the consensus now holds that, during the evening of December 12th, as the München battled the tempest, the vessel plunged abruptly into a profound valley between swells. Unable to regain stability in time, it then confronted an enormous surge of seawater, probably reaching 100 feet or 30 meters in height, that crashed violently against the hull. The torrent of seawater inflicted severe harm on her upper structure, tearing away the lifeboat from its mounts, shattering windows, and probably wrecking vital machinery. Rendered helpless and adrift without propulsion or control, the vessel fell prey to the raging tempest, enduring relentless assault from the swells until water overwhelmed her holds, and she may have even overturned. Judging by how long distress signals continued to broadcast, Experts conclude that the München stayed afloat for as much as 33 hours. She probably wandered aimlessly with a severe tilt, rendering navigation aboard nearly unfeasible and confining her sailors in scattered positions throughout the ill-fated craft, before she ultimately vanished under the surface. Such a grim conclusion befell a vessel once deemed all but impervious to sinking. At the time this video was produced, the München's remains have yet to be located. Yet her tale stands as a poignant testament to the extraordinary courage displayed by merchant seafarers, both in her era and among those navigating the oceans now. While maritime transport has grown far more secure through insights gained from disasters like the München's, those who brave the waters continue to face profound risks and hardships from nature's fury, ensuring the global flow of goods and people persists. Thank you for watching.